Okay, so I'm going to kick off now because I know we're really sticklers for time. So first off, thank you for turning up. I was really worried that it would be an empty room that I'd come to. Clearly, I don't work for any companies that that are putting products out. So I really appreciate you turning up. So the idea for this talk, then, I guess, really is. And Bruce sort of set some things up quite nicely this morning because everybody's building things, and there's lots of layers that are being built upon. But bad things can happen, and we've seen some of those things in not necessarily production, but in cryptocurrency. So first off, before we jump in, then an introduction to myself. Basically, I've been a cyber investigator in the UK for our regional organised crime unit. So what that means is cyber-dependent crime, network intrusion, DDoS attacks, cryptocurrency thefts, that kind of thing. So additional to that, my role in the police, I've been a counter-terrorism investigator, and most of my career I've been sort of in that area before moving into cybercrime. Also doing digital forensics, so I kind of got a bit of background across all those, and then specialised a little bit in cryptocurrency as I've gone along. So in fact, Sunday was my last day as a police officer. I'm actually moving to the NHS now as part of their digital team. In addition to sort of those bits and pieces, I've done research around cryptocurrency, and I've done that as I've done a master's at Edinburgh Napier. So I don't know if any of you are sort of aware of Professor Bill Buchanan. I'm sure you are, but if not, check out his amazing stuff. A couple of papers that I've sort of worked on recently that have been released. Journal of British Blockchain Association have just put that one out in their new release, so that's on their online portal. And I've also done an Ethereum-based item, which was part of my thesis. So why turn up to a blockchain conference and start talking about cryptocurrency? Well, I guess it gives us a really, really good indication of what might happen if everything was put out in production and stuck onto the edge of a network. So it's attracted large-scale heists, and I'll sort of cover a few of those as we go along. I say battle-tested, learned the hard way. I guess it's just had more of a kicking because it's been on the fringes of the internet. What people like to do, like all criminal activity, and you see it in nature, is they go for the weak bits and start trying to pick people off. Well, we've seen it sort of sitting on the fringes and being picked off. So we're going to have a quick talk around some of the common vectors, and then also the challenges actually that it gives law enforcement. And there are a lot of challenges, that this whole infrastructure brings, because traditional crime was quite easy. There was a real place, a real time, and a real person did it. And you'd send resources there, you put time and effort in, and you'd pick away, and you'd find a criminal. Well, now, now it's harder. Police are just catching up, I guess, with cloud technology and things like that, because you start looking at cross-border, trying to get information or data for your citizens that reside in one area, but they hold their data in America, for example. So that's difficult. But now we're obviously spreading that even further, and we don't even have borders, and where does the data sit? It's all over the place. So it's confusing, and it's a lot for law enforcement to catch up with. So clearly, cryptocurrency introduced the blockchain technology to the world. Now, as probably most of us know in here, Bitcoin wasn't the beginning, but for our purposes, I think we're probably all happy that Bitcoin certainly is what brought blockchain technology to people's attention. And it did that by creating trust, or pseudo-trust, as maybe we should now call it. But certainly it gave the ability for people to trade, have an interaction without knowing that other party. And that was what's really important about, about how Bitcoin, I guess, took on so much popularity. So it's an exchange mechanism. We call it pseudo-anonymous. Again, I'm talking to a group of people that are, quite au fait with that, and it's decentralized. So In the early days then, Bitcoin, I've not got the metrics on here, but essentially most of Bitcoin's use in that early period was put across Silk Road. And it was quite good for criminals to work in this way, because what they could do, the facility was made by Bitcoin to have that trustless, or be able to trade with each other. But in addition to that, they were able to then put it on an infrastructure in this website, which was obviously hosted on Tor, etc., and on the dark market, where they would create these users who built up their own reputation. So as was discussed by Bruce this morning, reputation and trust, they're linked together. And what we saw was just how effective that was, because criminals just came together and they were able to move large amounts of drugs, large amounts of money. And how did it all fall down? I'm not going to go into it here, but the human element, and we still come back to that, and all law enforcement really need to come back to that, where, the systems are virtually perfect, and if the system's used properly, that privacy is, relatively held together. But the mistakes are always made by humans, and criminals, they become blasé with what they can get away with, and then it all starts to fall apart. Right, so this was sort of part of my thesis really, I guess, but with money laundering, you essentially need to, or one of the problems with money laundering is getting the money into the system. You've got to place it into that system, and you've got to move it around, and then you've got to spit it out the other side so it looks like legitimate money. So you've all have heard, kind of, laundromat services and, that kind of thing. So in the old days, you'd be putting money into businesses that were legitimate, and you'd start to sort of push through those. But cryptocurrency, it kind of changes the game slightly. So, you can directly pay straight in from your dark web sales, or you could do drug sales on the street, get it into the system, and there's different ways of getting those into the system. But then ultimately, you're then trying to pull it out, so you can use the crypto ATMs. There's mixer and tumbler services and different coins that that would run those. Direct purchases of goods, prepaid cards, online services, and even doing trade-to-trade sort of with people on using things like local Bitcoin. But the market itself still is changing. So you have things like Open Bazaar now, which is eBay for Bitcoin hosted. So you've got a decentralized marketplace. So there's no centralized place for people to go and, law enforcement or anyone else to, pull out that information of those users. And then you're using the cryptocurrency on top. So, as things evolve, things push on and things change, quite significantly. So privacy. Some of you, I guess, will be aware of some of these coins. Certainly, from a law enforcement point of view, some of these coins, do make it difficult. Absolutely, and essentially, some of these coins have come around because privacy is an issue, and privacy and civilization as a whole is going through this now, where we've lost trust with centralized services, be that companies that hold our data, but not very well, and then it gets leaked on the internet. Every other day there's 400,000 new records or millions of different records that are getting put out there. So there's an argument that privacy is absolutely essential, and that argument, really does stand true, because, we can't have the amount of data getting spat out onto the internet at the rate that's going on. If you look at new things, sort of social engineering, you'll probably see some of these attacks around now, where people are going through that data, picking a username, picking a password, and then using social engineering attacks, approaching that individual and saying, we know you watch pornography, and we're going to start leaking your details. And it's these ecosystems, these little, criminal ecosystems that just fall out of these new, new bits of data and things that come out. So privacy, unfortunately, we're going to have to cope with as law enforcement as we move forward. Certainly Monero, they're using ring signatures, which are quite complicated. They're starting to hide as well things like the transaction values. and the timing information, so you can't do temporal attacks, or you can't do the kind of attacks that you'll have seen on Bitcoin when they're detecting nominal amounts, etc. But interestingly, things like Zcash, only 1% of their traffic or their transactions are actually done using the completely private transaction. So that's interesting in itself. Clearly, that technology is starting to move its way through all the infrastructure that we're looking at. Certainly with Ethereum, we know they're bringing that in, and it was being talked about this morning as being a package that's going to be available for for Hyperledger, etc. And you can see exactly why something like Zcash, and the ability to share that secret, and have the ability to kind of make a transaction knowing you're not going to leak private information, is really important. Self-sovereign identities where, as a user, you can say, I am this person, but I don't want to give you all my private details. And that's the kind of mechanism where I guess we're going to see, ZK snarks, etc., or Starks, as the evolving patterns are going to get used. And then we've got things like privacy contracts and other sort of specific ones like Deep Onion that are looking at trying to get the popularity of Tor and get people on board of, if you want to use this, use Deep Onion, etc. It doesn't always work though. Zcash, has had a number of papers kind of written about how you can still find information and how you can still pull out, some of the temporal information, etc., around Zcash. But it's an ever-changing game. Researchers are always going to try and pick apart, these protocols, etc. And similarly, the people that are designing them are going to sort of build them up and come round. So we can see this out in the wild. I mean, I'm covering things that, that sort of able to talk about, not particularly jobs maybe that I've worked on. But if you look at shadow brokers, who were trading some of the stolen items from Vault 7, etc., they used Bitcoin initially from their ill-gotten gains. They've then used multiple wallets, and they've pushed them into Zcash, but they've done it using Shapeshift. So I'm sure many of you have used Shapeshift, but what it does there is it basically enables them to change one currency to another. But there is also the ability to actually see what those transactions are using their API. So they've pushed information in using Shapeshift, and then investigators have been able to go back and say, yeah, you have used a privacy coin, but at this stage here, you've done it in a way that we've still got, a little bit of visibility. So again, it's a human element where, where things can be discovered, and that's how, a lot of these things are done. So one of the other ones then is the DNC hack. There's a number of Russian individuals in this case where they've used lots of different services. So what's made them fall down in this particular instance is the use of a particular service. It was a VPN based in the UK. They've used a small amount of money, or they've done a transaction which in itself is quite easy to locate on the blockchain because everything's there to be seen. But it's quite a specific or a unique sample. So again, they've been able to pull that data out and then narrow it down and look at that particular transaction itself. And that's just one instance, of that whole picture. That's quite a sort of deep running investigation, and if you look at that into detail, certainly in the indictment sheet, there's pages and pages of information, which is really interesting from a, sort of a researching point of view as to where, where these things can be pulled apart. So criminal smart contracts, the Ring of Gyges was a paper that was written around using contracts for crime. Now, they kind of went through, the different scenarios that, you could go through there. So there was things like assassins, being able to do key exchange or a WikiLeaks style sort of removal of information, but ultimately, you can create a smart contract that you can leak secrets, etc., and do that in a way that is relatively, trustful. Now, I think, I've not seen it yet, and I'm quite surprised, if I'm honest, that the use of smart contracts haven't been used for command and control or for DDoS payment and facility, because it just suits that kind of crime model. I'm sure that's going to pop up at some point. But people pay money in, IP address is put in, and it gets taken down. So, I'm sure that's likely to appear at some point. And similarly, sharing data, exchanging credit card details or images, and then even sort of, the private identifiable information. All these we've seen as marketplaces on the dark web, for example. You can go and buy, a lot of this stuff that we're talking about, things like the malware exploit kits. So, it's probably at some point, we'll see that coming into existence. So one of the other reports then that's pretty good for viewing is the Internet Organised Crime Threat Assessment. Now, it's released by Europol. They do one every year. It's a really good document. Having worked with Europol, I can, sort of hand on heart really say that they're one of the best policing organisations across the world, and I've worked with quite a few, certainly the big name ones. But what Europol do is they bring all the different countries together, and they actually work together, not just on paper. They actually pull resources together, joint operations together in intelligence, etc. But they've got a lot of resource, and they're sort of well funded, well organised, and they run really well. But their report that they bring out, is a good indication of the kind of crime that's happening in that area. So one of the key findings this year was ransomware. I've run a number of sort of large-scale ransomware investigations, and I've been part of our response when obviously WannaCry came and hit our area. And to be fair, probably the headlines, don't do it justice in terms of smaller businesses. So, individual small businesses, builders, one-man bands, etc. They get their machine taken down. They don't do backups, or the backups have been wiped by the attackers that are manually kind of going in and wiping everything. And it can genuinely kind of destroy businesses and livelihoods. So ransomware is particularly nasty, not just the headline WannaCry that realistically, they only took a small amount of money but caused a lot of disruption to the NHS, for example. But then we get sort of new kind of crime areas that bubble up because, now we've got cryptocurrency mining, etc. So CoinHive has sort of come to the fray as being one of the cryptocurrency mining programs that would run as malware or run in your browser, but in the background, just taking your resource. So again, this is kind of interesting as a new sort of area, that sort of suddenly overnight you'd see it everywhere. There was a number of websites by some government ones, for example, sort of high-profile businesses that got infected by this kind of thing. So not particularly great, and suddenly it's a bit of a flash in the pan. There'll be a lot of it, and then it'll kind of dissipate a little bit when you get the virus vendors, etc., being able to detect and push some of these threats away. So again, there's a couple of papers on, the browser-based things, and I think they looked at it and they kind of found that there was about 9 individuals or 10 individuals that were certainly making all the money from the crypto browsing. So if you wanted to go and do it yourself and try and infect a small number of people, you weren't really going to make a lot of money from it, and certainly putting yourself out there for for the things that come if you get caught doing that kind of thing. So that kind of attack then brings in things like fileless crypto miners, sort of malware that runs behind, PowerShell exploits for execution against those threats, and then you'd have something like CoinMiner that basically goes onto your system and then kills all of its rivals, and then reinstates itself as the ultimate of all the coin miners. That kind of thing, and you see that within botnets. You know, we see activity in botnets where, you know, it sweeps across and there's an infection, large botnet, and then you'll get another one that comes on, and its first job is to, you know, kick off all of those other botnets. So, you know, it is a bit of a fight for who is the best. So coming back then really, I guess, to, you know, attack vectors. I say operating system or infrastructure vulnerabilities. You know, there are CVEs for a lot of our you know, projects, etc., that are running on at the moment. So those exist. You know, and it's fair to say that if you've got a number of nodes all running on the same operating system and there's a particular vulnerability, that there is potential, you know, that is an attack vector, certainly a platform that that's possible to, you know, to get in and disrupt. Software bugs, server and client side, you know, so there's ways of leaking information, either from, you know, from APIs, you know, that kind of technology, and you know, if you're running dApps or if you're running certain bits of software, you know, again, you know, there's another interaction point where, you know, between your blockchain network and your client software, there's potentially some vectors where those can get exposed. Smart contract bugs, we've seen them. I'm going to revisit a couple of them shortly, but you know, that's definitely, you know, sort of seen in the wild, and that's something that people need to be pretty switched on about. And I guess really it's a defense in depth type thing. You know, what happens if your smart contract goes wrong? What are your backups? You know, what other methods can you enforce that if there is one error, that it doesn't affect your entire system? You know, and I get that I'm talking about sort of non-permissionless blockchains here, but you know, some of these will you know, still relate to permissioned. Encryption vulnerabilities. You know, if there is a method or an encryption bug in a library that you're running, you know, that can be, you know, that can expose a number of your smart contracts or a number of your transactions that's going to take place. So code dependencies, open source libraries. You know, again, we're building on top of, you know, layered meshes here. So we are dependent on them. You know, we've seen that recently. We might get onto them. That sort of node, there was yeah, like one of the libraries that was running, you know, was installed open source wise onto numbers of different things, and there was, you know, bugs that were laid bare in that. And there's still hardware bugs, so depending on what your blockchains are running on, you know, there's still potential for someone to do some mischief if they were clever enough to be able to run something into the system or have physical access to any of your nodes. Yeah, so the kind of things then we've definitely seen in the wild and that have caused major problems, something like reentrancy, where we've got the smart contract flow logic. So in this example, it is basically where there's an ability to run a line of code before it does the balance update. So with the DAO, you know, it just went through, allowed it to run until it was drained. Timestamp dependence, I've not particularly seen this out in the wild, so I'm not sure how often this would take place. But where code is being used with timing information, so I think it's a bit more Ethereum based, so so many different projects here, but where the system allows for the time to be taken from the miner's local time clock, and then the ability, I guess, then for you know, for the changes to take place. It shouldn't really be used on a time basis within smart contracts, but you know, that's basically how it's been implemented. Transaction order independence, so the ability really to have a look at what's coming up in the future. So in this instance, there was a paper that covered some of the guessing games, really, the ability to guess what would happen, where the person guessed what would happen, they'd win a prize, but you were able to then see if the real guess had been guessed, so the person that actually owned the money, and was able to then kind of drop the value of the prize before it took place. And basically all they did is they could see what was coming. So the transaction was placed in the memory pool, it was put there, it's there for everyone to see. It's not being put into its block, it's not being assigned, it's not being validated. To the point where it's being added to the chain, but it's there. So what you can do, or what people have done, certainly with with Ethereum, top up the gas and being able to kind of nip in and sort that out. So another thing where it probably could be used is decentralized exchanges. They're working on the same mechanism. You'll see the bids being put onto the blockchain, and you can see that go in. So effectively, if you had the time and you could be bothered, etc., you could start pushing in and doing some stuff there. So again, this is just an illustration, I guess, really, of what is out there. Doesn't seem too bad at the moment, but trust me, if someone builds something where there's enough money to gain from doing that, they'll get in there and they'll start doing it. Mishandled exceptions. So in all programming, mishandled exceptions cause all kinds of problems. It exposes maybe what software and versions we're all running, but in this case, it might allow an advantage on the system to occur, or it might be able to create DDoS type attacks to the system. And we've seen Shanghai attacks, etc., with Ethereum. That there's possibility to kind of push into that and and cause problems for the system. There's also buffer, under and overflow exploits. So all kinds of problems can happen from that, depending on how your smart contract's been built. And what the attacker can gain from getting stuck in there. So encryption, bad number, random number generator. There was I think it was a JavaScript module on Android, but essentially the random number was generated badly, and it had I think it was another IV vector, so they were able to use that number again and again, and then exchange money out. So we're building on the shoulder of, or building on, a house of cards, really. It's just important to realise that, any one of these things can drop at any point, and what effect will it have on that system. So 1.2 billion in cryptocurrency was stolen since 2017, and that's only in May 2018, so there's a lot more to add to that now. So it's a pretty good business for criminals, in all fairness. There's a lot of money that they've been taken out of that system. How have they been doing it? A lot of social engineering. For anybody certainly that's kind of been around the Ethereum space, or any of those forums, fake websites, malvertising. So this could be drive-by downloads, or sort of items that are maintained in your banners. Cut and paste attacks were particularly good, just in terms of, it just shows you how ingenuitive people sort of become. So you can't be bothered to type out your 20-byte Ethereum address. Clearly, you're going to make mistakes. It's quite long, it's complicated. So you cut and paste. So in the background, malware running, process takes over your clipboard, you paste in your legitimate address, or you cut your legitimate address, you paste it into your wallet, you press go, and it sends it to the attackers, which I'm sure many of you have seen. But it just shows you just how, how people will change their attack patterns pretty quickly. Because that was definitely not a thing, until then. Social media account takeover. If you want to be that company, the best way to pretend to be that company is to just go and hack one of the members of their team, get into the team, hack the Twitter account, and then go ICO started, and then paste your wallet address. I'm not, that's how people do it. That's how you shouldn't do it, obviously. False posts. So again, forums, leaked incorrect addresses. I've just got the leak address. Let's get on it now. If you start posting to this address, and it's amazing just how much money is made from some of these pretty basic attacks. So Mt. Gox still is up there as being one of the biggest, just because of the amount taken. So 2014, 460 million, and that was done basically by a compromised machine of an auditor, apparently. Social engineering attack. So pretty successful on that front. The DAO we've already mentioned. Smart contract bug. CoinDash, 7 million they lost in 2017. Hacked website. So again, social engineering to a certain extent, but a genuine hack of the website. So cybercrime and a little bit of social engineering because they're purporting to be someone else. Parity 2017, multi-signature bug. So it allowed for an unchecked request. Again, a smart contract function bug. So again, that left them with an issue, and that was a coding error. And not to be, sort of content with that, we had Parity Part 2, which was frozen funds in 2017, and that was accidentally killed, allegedly, by DevOps 199. So sorry if you're here, DevOps 199. I don't need to blaze you, but accidental. And again, that was a smart contract bug. EtherDelta, that was a compromise of the website and a bit of a key exchange issue. So again, that was a bit of a strange. Bit of a strange hack to their system, but again, 266 million, you can't really sniff at that. And what this shows you is, if you look at all that money's in the system. All that money's either got to come out of the system, or it's going to be spread around, or it's going to buy criminals. And this is how organised crime works: is they pull in funds from a funding stream, and it funds other things. So depending on who's committed this, if they're purely just pure cryptocurrency criminals, then perhaps we won't see that going into the into the other criminal areas. But certainly organised crime from from numbers of states that we can mention, that goes straight into drugs, straight into people trafficking, and that kind of activity. So ICOs went mental. Luckily, they've kind of settled down to a certain extent, although I believe now it's all about security offerings, so good luck with that. Personally, just be careful, that's all I'm saying. 78% deemed a scam by the research that had taken place, and if any of them have paid out or made the money, certainly, these last couple of weeks, there's not a lot of money to be made there. Social engineering, phishing, database leaks and harvesting and targeting. So if your name and address was leaked onto the internet in one of the many leaks, and I would suggest that it probably has been, if any of you have been on the internet for longer than 6 months, you've probably got accounts you've forgotten about. Just go and change them, because they'll be compromised. But yeah, people are just going to target individuals, and we've seen that. An individual works for XYZ, right? That's the weakest link. People are the weakest link. So two-factor authentication, all that kind of stuff. And then we've got new cryptocurrency malware that's going to come, it's doing key logging, which is the kind of thing we normally see with malware. Credential stealing, standard, it just needs your stuff. Remote access, it wants your stuff and wants to see you doing your stuff. But now it's got a couple of extra add-ons, because, why not? So crypto mining just comes as standard, just have it running in the background. You might as well make very little money at the same time. But also crypto wallet stealing. So that is going straight onto your system and saying, has this person got a wallet? I want some of that, and it's going straight in there and trying to grab the details. So, it's new attack vectors directly for cryptocurrency owners. All right, yeah. So this was the one. The hacker backdoors a JavaScript and to steal Bitcoin funds. So again, this is a new kind of vector that we wouldn't necessarily have seen before, and having sort of gone to the Linux event in Edinburgh not so long back, open source is huge and massive supporter of open source, but as a community, we're probably going to start getting looked at now by attackers who want to come in and be part of that ecosystem, because if they can create a little bit of a backdoor and get into any of these things, I mean, certainly, GitHub itself is huge and massive. It will now become a target, I would suggest. So what kind of issues is this going to cause for law enforcement? Well, blockchain as a whole then brings new technologies. So persistent web hosting, so things like Ethereum Swarm, interplanetary file system. We're going to see, storage en masse. We're going to see things like the Ethereum naming system, so it gives it a name, gives access, and ultimately is unstoppable, unbreakable, uncensorable. And we've already discussed about privacy, I guess, a little bit earlier. And I understand why people want to be uncensored, but I can assure you, having worked in a number of these areas, some of this material, doesn't want to be accessed by everybody, I'm not sure what the answer is going to be for that. I guess there might be including, a whitelist. I don't want to see this stuff. I don't know. I don't know what the answer is going to be, but certainly it's going to make life difficult for law enforcement. Decentralized storage, again, hosting material, etc. And then we're also looking at messaging applications, so things like Whisper on Ethereum, decentralized socialized media. And there's good use cases for these, because people like Facebook have been selling data, selling people's data that they believe they own themselves. So they're going to solve lots of problems, but it's just going to give new problems to law enforcement and those that need to look at that material. So yeah, Namecoin, for example, an Ethereum naming system. Namecoin's being mentioned by FireEye for sort of hosting or creating a name essentially and access to some of their exploit kits. So it's not in the land of make-believe. This stuff is kind of out and running. Blockchain storage, so Bitcoin Cache file hosting, IPFS, Ethereum Swarm, and things like graphite, have been pushed by journalists in order, for people to have a Google suite, sort of decentralized and in the sky. And again, these are covering really good use cases, but they might cause, law enforcement problems and or even just people that are protecting, networks as people try to get rid of company secrets and things out of systems. We're going to start seeing these being built into tools because, without them we can't really see what's going on. So one of the things then for around the Ethereum type work that I've done, is just create a number of different sort of areas that need to be looked at. So that's the edges to the networks essentially. ATMs, retailers, exchanges, decentralized exchanges. Around identity, so when we're looking at individuals or accounts that have been involved in criminality, you can see a transaction 1 and 2, but actually you can also see that they've taken part or they've done a bid on a Ethereum name service. What does that relate to? Is that a new kind of group of addresses that that are going to be used in another set of bad transactions, etc. Physical. So this really is for us as law enforcement kind of things that we should be thinking about looking at if we're at scenes, and also identity signatures. So the ability for us to have a look at smart contracts and say that this method ID, for example, is talking about an ERC20 exchange. So we can say, well, actually, it doesn't stop here. Our line doesn't stop at a contract, and we think nothing else has gone on. Goes to the contract, and then we see that actually there's an exchange between two other parties lower down. So these are things that haven't been brought to our attention before. And it's a very, very quickly moving space. So there's a lot of problems for law enforcement. So how to stop the unstoppable? I don't know. I just thought I'd put that out there in case any of you could answer that at the end, because once it's up and running, I guess that's it. So reaching consensus or upgrading the system. I guess for permissioned, this is going to be quite easy. But certainly when we start to look at non-permissioned systems, it'd be interesting to see, for example, how proof of stake goes, if that goes nice and easy, or if we find that there's other factions that decide to try and split off. Incentives, I guess, for change need to be put in place. Upgradable contracts now. I know that's something that's been mentioned in the Ethereum area. So it kind of goes against what the whole point of the smart contract was in the first place. Code is law, etc. But I think there's probably places where an upgradable contract is acceptable for certain things, but certainly it's a strange one. Side chains, I know there's a lot of data storage, and there's lots of kind of different avenues of having interactive chains, and I can certainly see that personal identifiable information may be stored in a permission chain, and then you'd have kind of shoots out to a non-permissioned if you wanted to do some of that kind of thing. But again, I guess these are areas that that are changing quite quickly. Incident response. So I suppose what we could kind of say is how would you I've put my alarm on to remind me that I should stop talking shortly. Incident response. If you had an insider threat from your organisation, how would you know? You've got everything on the blockchain, yeah, but how do you know there isn't somebody interfering with that system? How do you know you have control of all your nodes? If I came in as an investigator into a system, I'd want to start looking at your logs for your systems, user access. So I'm just putting that out there really, that when you're building your infrastructure, when you're building your new products, don't believe that everybody in your organisation is going to do everything right. They're human, they're going to take shortcuts, and unfortunately one day you might get a bad person trying to do a bad thing from the inside, and that's difficult because they've got access to your keys, they've got access to your mechanisms, and humans kind of find ways to kind of poke the way out and and break out. So blockchain seam metrics, I guess it would be nice to have your network kind of monitored for security incidents or for changes in nodes or where bad nodes pop up. I guess that would be interesting. And then realistically, from my point of view, as a crypto researchery, forensic type person, is when we're dealing with criminals and we go into to their addresses, be that if they have been traditional crime, organised criminals, drugs, etc., gun running, when we go in there, do we have the tools for us to be able to do what we need to do, which is to say, does this person use cryptocurrency? What's the balance on their system? Can we work out who they're paying money to, and who their networks are? So it's that kind of thing, really, I guess. So there needs to be a lot more work around that. We need to go beyond just tracking and tracing on the blockchain. The blockchain is bigger, it's deeper. It runs on different levels and different stacks. So I think that is pretty much it. So is there any questions from anybody? No.
Show me again the slide with the ICO scams, because I had a friend who made some money and he was pretty serious about investing in some ICO. I said, don't do it. I was sending this picture. I said,
yeah.
Good man,
yeah. And definitely the security offerings, they're going to be huge soon, apparently. But I think a lot of people have been burnt from ICOs, I would imagine. So.
The guy had a suit and he had a full color brochure.
Must be legit. I mean, what else do you need? Right. Okay. Yeah.
Can you go back to the one with the guessing game thing?
I was.
Yeah. Oh, sorry, right. Yeah. Hold on. We'll do that one first. Yeah.
You can probably email.
Oh, no, in fact, the slides are already on the thing. They're ready to download, but yeah, sorry, go on.
One of the use cases people talk about in things like open science and stuff is actually just establishing authorship and ownership of intellectual property. And that seems like this is the really big hole in that.
Yeah.
I've got a new thing, and you put up your transaction, and someone's like, thank you very much.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully you're going to be a goodie and not bring that in as a new thing, but that's quite clever. I like it.
Well, I'm trying to figure out how to get started. You have to think like a baby.
Right, great. Thank you very much. Cool.